I am M. Chamundeeswari, Associate Professor in Computer Science, V College, Virudhunagar. In this video, we see about what is data source control and data bound control in ASP.NET. Data source control. Data source controls are the tools that provide data to the data bound control and support execution of operations like insertion, deletion, sorting, and updates. Data source controls connect to and retrieve data from a data source, for example, from SQL server, from ODBC server, or from XML file. Data source controls make it available to other controls to bind to without requiring any programming code. A data source control interact with data bound control and hide the complex data processing operations. The available data source controls are SQL data source, enabled to work with the SQL based database such as Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle. Access data source, enabled to work with the data with Microsoft Access file. XML data source, enabled to work with the information from a XML file or an XML source file. And sitemap data source, to work with a hierarchical data representation in sitemap file. Data set data source, used to work with the data that is represented in a data set object. Data bound controls, used to display data from a database. The available data bound controls in ASP.NET are grid view control, data grid, details view, trees view, menu, data list, repeater, drop down list, bulleting list, checked box list, radio button list, list box, and AD rotator. Whenever we want to use data source control with SQL data source, the SQL data source control is a data source control that is used to connect to relational database. To use SQL data source control, set the provider name and connection string property is must. The provider name is used for the type of the database used, and connection string is used for connection to the database. We can even connect the Oracle or any other data source that can be accessible through OLEDB or ODBC. By default, in ASP.NET, the provider is system.data.sql client. It means connect to SQL server database. By default, the provider is system.data.sql client. It means that connect to SQL server database. The syntax for SQL data source is ASP:SQL data source, and default attributes used in any ASP.NET controls are ID, used to refer in a data program, and then run at server, then provider name as a system.data.oledb. The connection string used to specify the name of the provider. Here we can use OLEDB connection. The attribute used in SQL data source are first one, select command. This makes a string value, that is the SQL command we want to connect to manipulate. Connection string. The connection string must be the kind of string that the provider expects, which is defined in the provider name attributes. After SQL data source connection is placed or attached to any applications, then we can include data bound control to the data source control. The data bound control is commonly used data bound control is grid view. Grid view control is a control used to display the data in a table format on a web page. It displays data in both rows and columns, where each column represents a field and each row represents a record. Grid view helps to perform key activities like insert, delete, sorting, and paging. The syntax for grid view control is ASP:"grid view", then specify the attribute as ID is equal to name of the control, run at attribute having a value server. The properties used for grid view controls are allow paging. This property is to set true or false. It is used to support the paging in grid view control. Then second one, allow sorting. This property supports sorting in a grid view control, that is enable or disable via true or false value. Sort expression. This property provides current sort expression or field name which is determined the order of the row. Data source. Get or set the data source object that contain the data to populate the control. Then last one, data source ID. It bounds data source control to use data source to bind your data. Then other properties used in grid view controls are auto generate edit button used to set a separate column to the added data source. Auto generate delete button. It is used when a separate column should be added to delete a record. Auto generate columns. This property is very important. It is used when columns are automatically created for each field of the data source. The default value is true. To bind the data with the data grid control or data bound control, we can use the tag called column. The column section provides how the columns are displayed in a grid view control. The column section take any number of data bound field elements. The bound field elements are what you use to associate column displayed in a grid view control to a column of data from the table in a database. The general syntax for column tag combined or bind with grid view control is we must specify column tag. Within the column tag we must specify more than one bound field which are having an additional attributes header text, name and data field. This header text is to display the name of the message to be displayed on the screen, and the data field is used to specify the attributes that are defined in your database. When we use data bound field element, the column appears from left to right in the order in which they are used in the column section. Therefore, we can easily changing the order of the each attribute in which they appear in the grid control just by changing their order of the column section. This is here is some of the examples are given to specify the attributes displayed on the screen. Then to edit or update the attributes in the table, we can use the element called edit column tag. To activate the edit command, we must use the tag as ASP command field. Then specify the attributes show edit button set to true. Then to delete on any attributes or any row in a grid view, we must use the tag ASP command field show edit button equal to true and show delete button set to true. The purpose of using command field is it's a special field used by data bound control to display the command button to perform delete, edit, insert or select operations. The syntax for specifying more than one command field is we can specify more than one command field tag within the column tag used to activate or used to access the command within the grid view. Then you must specify the attributes used on the particular display device. We can use the tag bound field, that is ASP bound field, then specify the data field and header text attributes to specify the name of the attributes displayed on the screen on the display device. Then whenever we want to update our database, we must use the command update command. Update the table name, set the set of attributes to be changed. Whenever we use update command, we must specify the update parameters, that is the name of the parameters used to change within the database by specifying the update parameters. Within the update parameters, we must specify the name of the attributes, its type and other sequence. This here is a simple examples used for updating your database by specifying the update parameter. Whenever we specify the update parameter, the database will be automatically updated in your database. Thank you.